The Trump administration is testing all sorts of ways to use or abuse government power for censorship and harassment. That brings us to a concerning story where Trump's DOJ took the very rare step of issuing subpoenas to 4 different journalists from the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal, which is a generally more conservative market paper that has been in lawsuits with Trump, and trying to force them to give basically secret testimony before a grand jury. Now, that is something that is generally hard to do unless there were really good reasons, to simplify. And the DOJ apparently didn't have them because it retreated, withdrawing the subpoenas because both outlets fought. The Post reporting on this kind of rare subpoena could be used to try to get a reporter to reveal sources, or, and this is not out of bounds to question, could be a kind of harassment tactic, because the administration has already indicted a reporter in Don Lemon and tried to sort of issue these threats and warnings and just make it harder for people to do their reporting jobs. Now, when this has happened, it's rare. Over 20 years ago, the Post reported there was an instance of this. Journalists and lawyers often talk about the so-called chilling effect here, where if you can get away with this up to a point, other people and reporters, including at outlets that might not have the lawyers and backing of the 2 that I mentioned, will kind of pull back a little bit. Over the past half year, the administration has also, we should note, searched one reporter's home, threatened news broadcasters over their war coverage, barred reporters from the Pentagon press office, and more widely, threatened comedians and other artists and dissidents simply for expressing their views. And that's not all. Although Trump says many things that he doesn't always do, we should note that ABC, which has already settled a prior Trump lawsuit for millions of dollars, is now facing more threats from Trump to sue them, because caving rarely works with this kind of thing. Trump says he is concerned about their coverage of the reflecting pool, as if that is a matter worth making a federal case. And then, in a very kind of Trumpian troll, he says, I like their money, a reference to the fact that he knows they were quick to cave last time. Organizations that have also been targeted by Trump's FCC include basically going after, as mentioned, not only Jimmy Kimmel, but The View. They ordered a review of ABC's local stations using a pretext to basically try to punish them or censor them for what everyone knows are First Amendment protected programs that may criticize or make fun of Donald Trump. Now, there's a twist tonight. ABC, having settled in the past, says they're fighting back, even tapping their big audience. They have a campaign that encourages viewers to weigh in, running this public service announcement on the Trump-targeted show, The View.
I had this idea for a show. Different women, different points of view.
The View has welcomed your favorite guests and covered the issues you care about for nearly 30 years. Now, the FCC wants to control who is allowed to appear on the show. Viewers, use your voice. Scan this QR code. You have until July 6th.
What you are hearing is the sound of some corporate executives waking up from their political slumber or their very sad fetal positions of the many, many years we've been living through this. And if you, as a citizen or a viewer, are watching going, wait, now they figured out they could tap their millions and millions of viewers to actually show in a democracy that they have support, well, yes, you might have figured it out before then. But the president, who did not take their settlement as a chance to enjoy a compromise or regroup, but took it, as bullies take these type of things, as weakness that he would exploit again, well, that president is now finding that even ABC, apparently, no shade, has found its breaking point. Who served as executive editor for the Washington Post, also in the news over subpoenas there. Welcome back.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Do you see any shift in ABC's posture here?
I do. I mean, they agreed to settle with Donald Trump even before he took office, giving him $15 million and $1 million in legal fees to settle a case that they probably could have won in court. Now it appears that they are pushing back, as they should. I think that there's no reason to yield to Donald Trump on things like this, and any concessions made to him are viewed by him as weakness, and he will just be acting sort of like a predator. He'll go in for the kill, and he'll try to wound you even further.
You know, I mentioned not in jest that many viewers and politicos would look at this as a fairly obvious point, not one that needed to be learned the hard way or in 2026. Given that you've been in a leadership position where you're kind of in the mix between your journalists, the sources you cover, and to some degree, whoever owns the paper, what can you tell us about your view of that, or why there's been such slow learning among at least some business leaders?
I'm not sure I understand, really. I mean, it was evident, I think, certainly to me and to many others, that if you yielded to Donald Trump, he would just go ask for more. I think people felt that they feared, I mean, it was fear, I think, was at play, fear that he would use the regulatory agencies against the networks, fear of further lawsuits, fear of not being able to complete business transactions that they wanted to engage in, and they thought maybe they could put that to rest. But I think that was a mistaken view. It was clear that they would never put anything to rest because Donald Trump would never be satisfied.
Yeah. On the Washington Post front, you've got a lot of solid journalists there. They've been under a tough situation. There's been layoffs and cutbacks. They've been attacked, of course, by this president the whole time. And I'm curious what you think of the journalists and the leadership that has seemed to decided to really fight this effort to put journalists in the secret grand jury proceedings and other places for reasons that we can't even really untangle fully.
Well, they would have done this when I was the executive editor, and they would have done it since, and they have done it since. They support their journalists. Look, they have been supporting Hannah Nathanson, whose home was raided by the FBI. They took all of her electronic devices, and of course, they're supporting their journalists now. Who had been subpoenaed to testify both before a grand jury, although that has now, of course, been withdrawn. They stand behind the First Amendment, and I think that one thing this case demonstrates quite well, actually, is that the news department of the Washington Post continues to do a really extraordinary job of journalism. They are working really hard in a very dedicated way, in a very determined way, to tell the public what is happening inside their government. And clearly they're paying a price for that. The Justice Department is coming after them in the most aggressive possible way. So I think they're doing good journalism, and that deserves recognition and support.
War powers has been my obsession since I came to Congress in 2013. And I faced off against my friend, President Obama, President Trump term 1, President Biden, President Trump term 2, always saying you can't send our sons and daughters to war without coming to Congress. The War Powers Resolution vote that we had today is historic in this way. In the 52 years of this act, this is the first time that both houses have looked at the president and said, your war is illegal and you have to stop it. It wasn't just the Senate voting. We took up a bill that had passed the House, and we voted for it. And so now both houses, Republican majority, have told the president, this war is illegal and you have to stop it. There are questions because of this 1983 case that wasn't about war powers, it was about something else. Like, okay, does the president need to grapple with this? But here's my argument. If the president doesn't restart the war in Iran, this is a moot question. And I hope the ceasefire holds because the war was stupid and illegal to begin with. But if he does restart it, we'll be in court immediately saying the houses of Congress who have the power under Article 1 have both said the war is illegal. And in the court of public opinion, we'll say this, wait a minute. You're sending our sons and daughters into a war when both houses of Congress, with Republican majorities, have said the war is illegal. This is outrageous. So we've got a court argument and a court of public opinion argument. I think the next sort of legislative move probably goes over into the appropriations and defense authorizing process, because the White House is up on the Hill now saying we need more money because of the Iran war, the supplemental or a reconciliation bill or a 40% increase in defense appropriations. We need more money. Wait a minute. Both houses have just said the war is illegal. So we'll move into an appropriations dollars discussion. But this vote today by both houses, Republican majority, builds a powerful argument for courts and also a powerful argument to the American public. Don't make our kids go into war that Congress has said is illegal.
You know, I don't want people to miss what you said about the next phase of the appropriators, because to be very clear, the reason the government has money is because Congress appropriates that money. Now, sometimes this government has decided to take money from elsewhere when Congress hasn't given them more, and that is a problem in and of itself. But is there actually an appetite from senators on the Hill of both parties to not continue to fund Donald Trump's war efforts? Because I think when we get into the territory of, like, are we going to fund the military, people, they get a little squeamish. Because then it's like, oh, they don't want to look like they don't support the military.
Yeah, you want to give a pay raise for the troops.
Exactly.
Of course we want to do that, sure. Well, that's a really good question. And this is like, you know, Hill speak that you guys know.
But the people at home care. They're like, well, what's going on?
Like, there's appropriations and there's authorization. But bottom line, these things come together. And the Trump team has complicated it because they've sent us a request for a defense bill that goes through the appropriations process. But they've also said, but we want a supplemental bill, too. And the news in the last couple of days is the Secretary of Defense has been briefing the Republican members in both houses about what more they want, and not the Democrats. I'm on the Armed Services Committee. I hear there's an $80 billion extra request. Nobody's talked to me about
$80 billion?
$80 billion with a B. Nobody's talked to me about what's in it. And then and that's a supplemental request, and then there may be another request as well. So it's like they want us to vote on door number 1 without knowing what's behind door number 2 and door number 3.
Give a $1 trillion budget to the Defense Department, Luke? I don't understand.
They've gotten a lot. They've gotten a lot. You know, I was looking back through files, and I actually interviewed you 10 years. I don't have the tape. I interviewed you 10 years ago, and you were same page on the AUMF, Authorization for Use of Military Force. Nat Cain, your son,
my oldest,
U.S. Marine, served as an infantry officer. Distinguished veteran now. He served. He served when you were running for vice president. Fortunate Son, that song. Well, Senator's son actually had some skin in the game. You had skin in the game. 13 service members have lost their lives in this
One
battle.
Virginian, Robert Marzon from Spotsylvania County.
Talk about the toll it takes as a parent when you know your son or daughter is in harm's way, and you know that that's being done without Congress's authorization. What does that feel like?
I was obsessed when I came to the Senate about war powers because I had watched Congress, I screw it up about the Iraq vote, Congress and the president. And at that point, I was lieutenant governor. Like, what power would I ever have? But when I came to the Senate, I said, listen, I am going to make sure before we send our sons and daughters into war that we do it the right way, not the wrong way, no shortcuts, follow the Constitution. And as I'm running that race, you know, just in the quirks of fate, like my oldest son decides he wants to be a Marine. So suddenly it was not just like I'm passionate because you got to follow the Constitution. I'm passionate because any kid that we're sending into war is just like my son. My son had 2 deployments overseas. Neither were in battle zones. There were some challenging deployments, not in battle zones. But, you know, if we're going to send our kids into war, I mean, Robert Marzon, the guy in Virginia who died, he was like 52. He had been deployed so many times. He was within months of retiring. You just can't shortcut this. You can't give a president. The framers would not allow George Washington to make this decision. They loved and revered him, but they said the stakes are too high in war to let one person make the call. And that's why Congress is supposed to weigh in. And presidents of both parties and Congresses of both parties have been willing to abdicate this. I ain't going to do it. I was governor during Iraq and Afghanistan. Too many of my Virginia Guardsmen and women were deployed overseas. I went to too many funerals, too many wakes, too many homecomings where the leader of the unit couldn't say all present and accounted for because they weren't all present and accounted for. If you're going to go to war, you got to do it the right way. That's what we owe to these heroic young people.
Senator, how do you look at, and this extension of Luke's question, and in one sense, how do you see 2027 when you know, ostensibly Democrats have control of the House, and I think with a greater degree of possibility, probability, the Senate itself. Taking an issue like this and leveling it up to the point where it's more than just, well, we're not sure, but, we got this vote anyway.
So here's a couple of things, Michael. That's like a Rorschach question. I'm just going to tell you what comes to mind. When I came to the Senate in 2013, nobody was talking about war powers. Everybody now knows the war powers issue. It's like we used to go weeks at a time without thinking about the reflecting pool. Well, now everybody thinks about the reflecting. Everybody talks about war powers now. Here's my sense about 2027. I have a worry and I have a hopeful feeling. If the election works out in the way I hope, I think we will win the House. And I think we've gone from a 20% chance Democrats have won in the Senate to 45%. And the arc's in the right direction. So it's not 50% yet, but the arc's in the right direction. Say we win both. My worry, Donald Trump will go on a revenge tour for 2 years. That's my worry. My optimism, Donald Trump has literally the biggest zone of indifference of anybody who's ever been president. What he cares about, and he cares about a lot, you're not going to cross him easily on those few things he cares about. But most things he doesn't care about. Right. In his first term, I got tons of legislation signed by Donald Trump recognizing Virginia tribes for the first time. Mitch McConnell and I lowered the tobacco age from 21 to 18. The things that Donald Trump doesn't care about, you put a bill on his desk, he's going to sign it and say it's his idea. I never got invited to a signing ceremony, but he signed it and said it was a good idea. Right. So I don't want people to despair. We actually, like Donald Trump's going to sign this housing bill. This is, Elizabeth Warren, Tim Scott, folks on the House. Yeah. There are things that you put them on Donald Trump's desk that maybe a traditional Republican might say, I'm not signing it for this, that, or the other reason, that he'll sign. So we're going to have to battle to stop the revenge tour. Right. But we shouldn't miss the opportunity to just put good stuff on the guy's desk. And I think there's, pretty good chance that a lot of good stuff we might put on his desk and he might sign.
Hi there, everyone. It's 4 o'clock in the East as the midterms inch ever closer. Donald Trump's desperate quest to interfere in our elections becomes more and more audacious and more obvious by the day. His moves appear increasingly brazen with every new devastatingly low poll that is released. It's now clear that other than the American people themselves, judges will be our only line of defense against Donald Trump and his administration's attempt at election interference. Yesterday, in a scathing rebuke, a federal judge blocked the Trump administration from allowing states to use its centralized citizenship database to cross-check the immigration status of their voters. In her decision, the judge wrote that states are, quote, actively removing U.S. citizens from voter rolls based on inaccurate information. All in all, the federal government has knowingly trampled on the privacy rights of American citizens in a manner that threatens the sacred right to vote. This court cannot stand idly by while that happens. It comes on the heels of a decision by another federal judge, this one a Trump-appointed one in Maryland, who blocked DOJ's efforts to obtain the state's voter rolls. As we brought you yesterday, she wrote this, quote, thus far, courts have dismissed 8 of these lawsuits on motions similar to the ones pending before this court. No court has ruled in favor of the U.S. to date. She added this, quote, the motion to compel will be denied. The dismissal of the claim will be with prejudice. Now, despite that stunning, unbroken losing streak, Donald Trump is undaunted and shows no signs of slowing down in his quest to seize control of our elections, even if that quest imperils our national security. On that, CNN reports this, quote, the Trump administration is threatening to withhold tens of millions of dollars in federal homeland security funds from states unless they adopt a sweeping set of election changes. Under new rules governing several Homeland Security grant programs, states must take a number of steps, including phasing out certain electronic voting systems and moving to hand-marked paper ballots. They must also run their voter rolls through a controversial Department of Homeland Security citizenship verification database. The judiciary blocking Donald Trump at every turn as he tries every trick in the book to rig the midterms and take control of our elections is where we begin today with some of our most favorite experts and friends. Voting rights attorney, founder of Democracy Docket, Mark Elias, is back. Also joining us, former Assistant Special Agent in charge at the FBI and National Security and Intelligence Analyst Michael Feinberg's back. Also back, NYU law professor, our legal analyst Melissa Murray. Mark Elias, I know you are the tip of the spear in these lawsuits. So just take me through the significance of these two defeats for the Trump efforts.
Yeah, it's really a big day yesterday when we got both of these. So first, for Donald Trump to try to rig the outcome of the 2026 elections, he is counting on building a national voter database. And once he has that, he will tell states who they can send ballots to and who they can't, who's eligible to vote and who's not. So in other words, he wants to create a list of all of the potential voters, remove the people he doesn't want to be able to vote, and then insist that only the people who remain on his list are able to vote. So the first part of that strategy requires him to get access to the state's voter files, because it turns out the federal government doesn't have such a list to begin with. It's never needed one. It still doesn't need one. So Donald Trump is trying to gain access to every state's complete voter file, which includes personal sensitive information like Social Security numbers, date of birth, and partisan information and the like. Well, they sued 31 states, and including the District of Columbia, and they are so far 0 for 9. My law firm and I, we intervened on behalf of voters to fight these lawsuits in all those states, and we are undefeated. The Department of Justice is without a single win. And I can tell you, as someone who is tracking all of the cases, both the ones that have been decided and the ones that have not, Donald Trump's Department of Justice is not going to see a victory anytime soon. Most of the hearings where we're waiting on final decisions did not go well for the Department of Justice. So I expect that their losses will increase and our victories will increase. The other case, though, is trying to tackle it, or is tackling it at the other end. And in this instance, what a federal judge in Washington, D.C. said was that actually the federal government can't use the SAVE database, this big database that comes with Social Security information and the like, can't use that to screen out people and to run state voter rolls against it, citing the Privacy Act. So far, based on yesterday's results, the Department of Justice has been thwarted in getting the data and also using the existing databases towards this effort. But look, we know that they're not going to give up. We know that they are not one to necessarily comply with every court order. So we're going to keep fighting.
I mean, Mark, they're 0 and 9, right? So they've lost every single case that they've brought. But I wonder if it is far-fetched to wonder if Bill Pulte's practice of going into people's mortgages in his housing role and being thrust into this OD&I post, I mean, is it your sense that they want access to the information, whether a judge permits them to use it or not, to sow chaos? Or what is your sense of what their operation is about if every judge is blocking them?
Yeah, so a couple of things. First is, you are exactly right. They are 0 for 9. I predict that before long they will be 0 for 15. Like I said, just based on the court, how the courts have sort of teed these up. They are appealing these, so there are a number of these now in the courts of appeals. So that's something to watch. In terms of your question, though, so I think we need to understand that Donald Trump has two purposes here. The first is, as you say, it is to misuse this data to sow chaos. It is to remove people from the rolls and to lie that he's removing people from the rolls because they were fraudulently on. I mean, this is a guy who is right now lying about there having been a vandalism attack on the liner of the reflecting pool. And if he's willing to lie about that, you can only imagine what kind of lies he will tell about what's in this data. So he'll tell lies about there being illegal voters and the like. But the second part of this is that he is setting up the same grievance structure that you and I have been talking about now, really for 6 years, 7 years. And that is this, he announces something, he loses, he goes to court, he loses. And then he turns to, in the case of 2020, he then turned to violent insurrection in the nation's capital. We see him follow this pattern over and over again. So right now they are in the losing in court phase, and I'm glad to be part of that effort. But he's not going to end with that, right? He's next going to turn to the aggrievement phase, in which he inspires his supporters, or he gives a permission structure to Bill Pulte or to Todd Blanche to do even more extreme things, like potentially even seize ballots.
I want to read a little bit more from the judge's decision, just so that before the disinformation floods the right-wing media ecosystem, it's clear how illegal this is and how blatantly unconstitutional the judge found it. This is from the judge's decision, quote, "The case implicates two fundamental rights that protect Americans from government overreach, the right to privacy and the right to vote. In the past year, several federal agencies have joined forces to create a centralized federal database that contains the private information of U.S. citizens, including social security numbers, citizenship status, and other sensitive data. But decades ago, Congress put protections in place to prevent precisely this type of centralized data bank. And the record in this case shows that the federal agencies that created this database knew that the database violates those statutory protections." Michael Feinberg, I would put money on the fact that Republicans were on the side of creating the statutory protections in the first place. Republicans used to care a whole lot. And Republicans used to loathe more than just about anything the federal government having all of the personal data of every voter in the country. Now Republicans are the advocates for the state seizing all this personal data. And if the Republican base were awake and receiving accurate information, it would be absolutely furious if it had any of the traditional sensibilities that Republicans have had for either of our lifetimes.
Well, I've said this before to you. The Republican Party exists in name only at this point. It is functionally just a wing of a personalist regime that is completely unmoored and untethered to anything that most historical conservatives in the United States over the past 100 years would recognize as anything regarding a neutral principle. And it's important to note, in that judge's opinion, several references are made to protections of information that the government has on its citizens. And it's not just one law. It is an interwoven web of multiple laws. There are protections for general personally identifiable information in the Privacy Act. There is protection for student information in the Buckley Amendments. There is protection for health information in HIPAA. There is a litany of protection for tax information, which makes it difficult even for people like I used to be in the FBI to obtain that data. And the notion that the Department of Homeland Security, one of the most patchwork and newest governmental departments that we deal with, would have the sophistication or the wherewithal to on the fly create some sort of master database that complies with all those laws is lunacy. And there's one other important factor which the judge didn't mention, but everybody should know. You know, I worked with government databases my entire adult life, and they all have one thing in common. They are maintained by human beings, and they are based upon information furnished by human beings. And with those two variables comes human error. That you would use something susceptible to typos and misnomers and mistakes of the pen in order to deprive people of what is arguably the most fundamental right in our country is once again lunacy.
We are right now 132 days away from the first midterms of Donald Trump's second term. We're following results in these key primary races across 4 states, not just one, that are going to shape the state of the opposition party, the Democrats, in their first nationwide challenge to President Trump's power in November. The results of tonight's elections in Maryland, in South Carolina, in Utah, and especially in New York are going to have tremendous implications for what happens in November and beyond. It's not just about whether Democrats have the ability to snatch back control of one or both chambers of Congress. It's a referendum on the first 2 years of the president's term, a first chance for real accountability. If you want to know how high the stakes are, just ask Donald Trump. This is what he told Republicans it would mean for him if Republicans lose control of Capitol Hill.
You got to win the midterms, because if we don't win the midterms, it's just going to be, I mean, they'll find a reason to impeach me. I'll get impeached.
I'll get impeached. In the 18 months since Donald Trump took the reins of the federal government, he's taken this country for a ride it didn't sign up for. He's launched a war that he said he would not launch. His policies have raised the cost of living instead of lowering it, and he's weaponized a justice system that he claims was weaponized against him. As Trump fully admitted in that clip you just heard, he fears accountability. And that is precisely what this year's elections are all about, an opportunity for the American people to reclaim some amount of power to restrain Donald Trump's anti-democratic ambitions. Every single primary race between now and November will give us a better sense of how that's going to play out, which brings us back to New York. The state of New York has 26 districts, almost none of which will change hands in November, except perhaps for one. New York's 17th congressional district, which offers Democrats one of their best chances of flipping a Republican seat to Democratic this year. It's currently held by the Republican Mike Lawler. But there's another intriguing dynamic unfolding in the state that's worth keeping an eye on, because it will shape the future of the Democratic Party and how it'll function as an opposition party during the second half of Donald Trump's term. And that fight is happening in the heart of New York City in 3 safe Democratic districts, where the city's mayor, Zohran Mamdani, has tested his influence in federal elections for the first time just 6 months into his tenure. His chosen slate of congressional candidates is small, but they have the opportunity of shaking up the Democratic Party in a big way. Brad Lander's decisive win over Dan Goldman in New York 10 tonight makes Goldman the first Democratic incumbent to be ousted so far this election cycle by a true outside primary challenger. The only other 2 Dems who've lost in primaries were driven out by Republican gerrymandering in Texas, in which they ran against one another or one against a former incumbent. Moments ago, Goldman delivered his concession speech and offered this reminder.
Let's remember, the enemy to all that we want and all that we hope for is in the White House, not in our own party.
Less than an hour ago, Adriano Espaillat, the dean of the New York Latino Politics and the head of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, became the second Democratic incumbent to go down to defeat at the hands of an outside challenger. He lost his race to Daria Liza Avila Chevalier, also backed by Mamdani. Meanwhile, Claire Valdez's victory in New York's 7th congressional district gave Mamdani 3 victories out of 3 and solidified his influence in this moment in time on New York City politics. Again, none of these districts will change hands. The Democrats who won in New York tonight will almost entirely become members of Congress for their districts. But who is driving Democratic politics, Democratic Party politics in November has huge implications, not just for Democrats, but for the whole country. Because the struggles for control of Congress is not just Republican versus Democrat. It's also about progressives versus moderates, outsiders versus the establishment, and crucially, who can actually win in November. And that's what tonight's elections are going to help us unravel. So let's get to it. Joining me for the hour to unpack tonight's results, Puck contributor Abby Livingston, former New York Congressman Max Rose. He represented New York's 11th district, covering all of Staten Island and parts of southern Brooklyn. Former New York Congressman Mondaire Jones. He represented New York's previous 17th district, which saw significant changes after redistricting in 2022. And Charlotte Alter, journalist, author of the New Humanism Project on Substack. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for being here on such an important night. And Congressman, I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to ask you first, because there are a lot of people who don't live in New York and may not care about what happened here, especially since virtually none of these districts will change hands. Only one in the entire state is likely to change hands. Why is this important this night?
Look, the most important outcome tonight was the Democratic primary in my old district, the 17th congressional district. Obviously, it's very different now post 2 cycles of redistricting in the past 4 years. than it was at the time I represented it. Otherwise, I'd still be in Congress right now. There's a Republican in that district. And
that's Mike Lawler.
That's Mike Lawler.
And he's what you might think of these days as a moderate Republican.
He is someone, and I've had this conversation with a lot of people, that a lot of folks in the press sort of give credit to as being a moderate, despite his voting record being lockstep with Donald Trump. He has succeeded in a way few others have at convincing people of the lie that he is somehow independent of Donald Trump. But what we saw tonight in the statement that he issued after the primary election result is a challenge of Kate Conley, now the Democratic nominee, to 6 different debates following the July 4th holiday. That is not the posture of someone who is feeling confident about his prospects in the general election. He's clearly got polling showing that he is vulnerable to defeat against Kate Conley.
And we've seen that. Max Rose, we don't describe your old district as being in play, but you did represent it not that long ago. Talk to me about what this night means to you. I suspect you might be a little worried about the direction the Democratic Party took in New York tonight.
Well, I mean, first of all, I know what Kate Conley is going through right now. I remember winning my primary in 2018 and thinking, shows like this would talk about me, and then AOC wins her primary that night too, and I'm like, no one ever heard about Max Rose that night. So you're welcome. So we have to make sure we're talking about Kate Connolly,
because she might be the only flip
ahead, because it's the Kate Connollys that are a pathway to Hakeem Jeffries becoming Speaker, and we should not forget that. And Kate will not be inviting one of the 3 Mamdani-endorsed individuals who won their primary. She will not be inviting one of them to campaign with her in her swing district. So we should always remember those dynamics. But with that being said, though, let's also highlight those individuals who lost their races today. No one can claim that Antonio Reynoso, Adriano Espaillat, or Dan Goldman were not leading progressives. These were not moderates by any sense of the word here. So this is something very different that's happening in the Democratic Party that's far more, I don't know if it's associated with vibes. I don't know if it's associated with Israel, but someone drew a line in the sand. DSA drew a line in the sand in these races and said, you're not with us. And that's really what caused this.
So you are worried a little bit.
I wouldn't say that I'm worried about the general elections because we're continuing to nominate people in swing districts that can and will win. That's really all I care about.
So, Abby, Max says that Kate Conley will help Hakeem Jeffries become Speaker. I'm not sure, but I think all 3 of the Mamdani-endorsed candidates tonight have said that's actually on the table, whether Mamdani or Schumer. Some have said they will not support either of them. Obviously, there are no Senate candidates tonight. How's this playing in Washington?
I think the most important thing to think about is that winning the House might be the easier step for Leader Jeffries. And so most party leaders build their support based on their state delegations. And to have some folks in his district or in his city who he didn't support means they don't have personal loyalty to him. So whether it's the Speaker's vote or future votes, it's going to be hard for him to count votes with the margin. And the reason is because of this Republican redistricting. This should be a very big year for Democrats, but this redistricting has shrunk it. So Hakeem Jeffries may have the same kinds of problems that Speaker Mike Johnson has had in getting his rebels in line on the big votes.
And later on, we're going to talk about what it will take for Democrats to win back the House. Charlotte Alter, Dan Goldman made a point in his remarks, and he said the enemy is not within. I happen to take the view that debates like these are healthy for a political party if you'd like to actually function as a political party in a big tent. Some take a view that this is damaging to Democrats at a time that they have to win back the House.
Listen, I think that you can't separate what happened tonight from what's been happening in New York City for the last 6 months, which is a kind of Mamdani honeymoon, a Mamdani moon. People in this city love Zohran Mamdani. Look at the way people poured into the streets when the Knicks won. Look at the way the city has felt different in the last couple months since he's been mayor, at a time when the rest of the country feels like it's falling apart. So I think I agree with my co-panelists here. I know that this is going to have a huge impact on what's happening in Washington. I think it It's going to, say a lot about the direction of the party. But I also want us to pause on this night and recognize that what happened tonight is related to the way that politics in New York City has changed. And that's actually a very positive story for Democrats. It's one of the most positive stories for Democrats in the country because people are really happy with how things are going in this city. Mamdani's approval rate is like near 80%. The vibes are good in a moment where almost everywhere else the vibes are really bad.
Can I make a caveat to that?
Yeah.
If we have time. So that plus people still think very poorly of the Democratic Party's brand. And you had two incumbent Democratic members of Congress who were viewed to be part of the establishment, insufficiently leading on a number of issues that matter to the specific electorates in their respective districts. And I think that did play a role when faced with dynamic, oftentimes younger challengers, not always, but oftentimes younger challengers who were speaking to the moment, if you will, of this just outrage, not just at Republicans in Washington, but at Democrats who a lot of folks perceive to not be fighting sufficiently hard enough.
Hold that thought. We're going to come back in just a moment with Abby Livingston, Max Rose, Mondaire Jones, and Charlotte Alter.
The Situation Room was used as a place to have these highly sensitive meetings about how to handle this issue. And you get into a very specific meeting on July 17th, 2025, Trump officials getting into that secure bunker. The level of panic that they had because Donald Trump did not want the word Epstein ever mentioned again around the White House. How did that meeting play out? And who were the leading voices saying, we got to put this stuff out, and who are the ones saying, we can't, he won't let us?
Yeah, so just to set the scene here a bit, Willie, what happens shortly before, like 2 days, I think, or 4 days before that meeting is they pass his one big legislative accomplishment last year, which was the One Big Beautiful Bill. They put all of their political capital into getting this done. And can they go out and start talking about that, the White House comms team or senior staff? No, this is where the energy goes, which is dealing with a crisis that has now exploded. A, it was self-inflicted. B, it became much worse after the DOJ and the FBI released this unsigned memo. It just had their insignias on it. Initially, some draft didn't even have that, according to our reporting, because nobody really wanted their name on this. And this was essentially something that some of the hardest line voices in Trump's government, who had spent years talking about Epstein and talking about Trump to be.
By the way, the unsigned memo said they weren't going to release anything else, right?
Yes, it said that. Well, it said they had looked. They hadn't actually released really anything yet, other than Pam Bondi's binders, which was months earlier, and we can talk about that as
recycled information.
Yeah, as a huge. It was almost all old information, but that was seen as the original blunder inside the White House. There were people in Trump's government who had spent years talking publicly about how there is this cabal of predators, and the government was sitting on this. And to be clear, there is a multi-administration failure in terms of dealing with the Epstein crisis. That's definitely true, or dealing with Epstein and prosecution. But they get in power, and they're serving a president who actually does not want to talk about this at all. He has been told that his name is in some of the files, that it's brief mentions. DOJ didn't exactly know what was there in full. They put out something to satisfy the base. It satisfies no one. It's got a missing minute from Epstein's prison cell in the video that they put out along with it. So this meeting comes to try to figure out how to deal with something they cannot get away with, and that Donald Trump keeps getting asked about it. The problem for them is the president doesn't want to hear Epstein. He would snap at the name. He would snap at anybody who would bring it up. And so they have several meetings in the Situation Room. We capture just a few of them. And the ones that we capture were almost exclusively about how to handle this in a way that deals with their boss.
That protects him?
That doesn't stoke further conspiracies, that doesn't hurt themselves, frankly, politically. So we describe, this is a huge meeting, this first one that we describe. It's the vice president. It is the White House chief of staff. It is the attorney general, the deputy attorney general, White House counsel, comms officials. I mean, the list is long. And they are talking about what to do now because this memo has just created such a stir. And one of the officials there, Deputy White House Chief of Staff James Blair, says something to the effect of, with all due respect, it's the calm strategy of this group that got us into this. And, there needs to be an actual plan here on how to get out of this. J.D. Vance, the whole time, wanted to release everything, including unsubstantiated information, about Donald Trump, which was
abusing a woman.
There was a second-hand allegation that was, I want to be clear, already public.
Right.
Yes.
And I want to be clear, too, that I'm not saying he abused a woman. What I'm saying is what shocked me was that J.D. Vance had this unsubstantiated charge of Donald Trump abusing a minor and told Susie Wiles in the group, in your book, told Susie Wiles in the group, oh, we need to release it all. He'll be fine releasing it. And Susie Wiles said, no, he won't.
Yeah.
And that's just one of the moments of many where J.D. Vance seems to be strangely disconnected from Donald Trump inside this book.
Just one thing. It was that specific incident, which, again, was a second-hand allegation that was never, and it was already
never
public. And it was, and the person who it was about never said it themselves. And it was public already. It was just, do you put it on this big library of information? And this person, as far as we know, was not a minor. We don't know that, but I don't know one way.
But again, J.D. Vance is saying put it out.
Yes, and there's just nothing that any of us know about Donald Trump that would suggest that he would want to steer people's attention to it. There certainly were, everything is not black and white in all of this. There were, as I said, a number of meetings. There were people who were concerned about the victims. Pam Bondi was concerned about people being aware of how much child pornography there was. There were people in the White House who were concerned about not hurting the victims more. But that was not the focus, primary focus of these meetings. This was about how to deal with a political crisis. And they were holding these meetings in the White House Situation Room to avoid leaks. That was the point.
In spaces where wars are planned and executed, and the bin Laden raid and everything else. Jonathan, the Epstein files are foundational to much of the MAGA base, to conservative voters, to podcasters. They've been talking about it for years and years and years. So with that in mind, and I know this isn't a book about the Epstein files, there's a lot more to be said, but what is your sense of why Donald Trump is so uniquely sensitive about the Epstein files? Why he was pushing not to have this stuff released? Why, as Maggie says, you couldn't even mention the word Epstein in the White House, certainly around him? What is it about him and the Epstein files?
I think there's an obvious reason and a less obvious reason. The obvious reason is he's mentioned, as the New York Times said, more than 38,000 times in the Epstein files. Him, his family, Mar-a-Lago. Jeffrey Epstein's obviously, one of the most notorious pedophiles, sex predators, is a monster of history. Trump fell out with him. Various reasons have been given, but he obviously had a very close friendship with him, and there's numerous photos of them hanging out together, videos of them partying together. So it's not a good look, to state the very minimum. There's another reason which I think is also very powerful, which is Trump is so used to being able to tell the base, do this, think this, here's where I need you to run, and the base runs. And this was the first time I've seen, I could make an argument a little bit on the vaccines. I saw him get booed when he praised COVID vaccines. That was a moment when he was out with this. But this was the time when he was saying, guys, don't look over here, look over here. This is a hoax. And they just said, no, we're going to keep looking over here. And I think that was hugely frustrating, that they were not marching in line and that this just kept going. I mean, again, there are a number of people at a senior level who underestimated this as a political crisis in the White House, who thought, and, to be fair, they've lived through Access Hollywood. Go through the list of crises they've dealt with Trump, and he's survived all of them. And for some reason, this was one that really stuck. And we obtained in the book some private polling and focus groups that Trump's team has done. And it's really profound when you see it, because this is March this year, more than a year after they first started trying to deal with Epstein. It's cutting through. It's really cutting through in the focus groups. People are bringing it up. And in the memo, the confidential memo that his pollster circulated to a small group of them, it identifies Epstein as a huge problem. A bigger problem than, was it bigger than crime?
It was crime, safety. Data centers. I mean, there was.
You're talking about some of the most salient political issues in the country, and Epstein was above them. So this was, and you know, you guys covered this very intensely, and everyone did. We did as well. When Biden withdrew from Afghanistan, you could almost plot his polling from there. It's not that dissimilar. One of Trump's advisors actually made this point. The summer of last year, the Epstein crisis actually, in retrospect, was a turning point. You do start to see him losing altitude from that point.